A few months ago, the Rivals dev team put out a survey asking players who their favorite and least favorite fighters were to fight. We were never told the results from the survey, but it did lead to a lot of funny moments online, with players not really being able to agree on who the most interesting fighter was to play against and what character was truly dreadful to see an opponent pick when you sat down for a set. To get an idea of how the broader community felt, I collected over 50 responses to a survey asking players to rank characters from being a 1, meaning they're game ruining, to a 10, being very enjoyable to fight. I also asked players who they mained and their rank, which will be very topical here when analyzing our dataset, since players tended to scale their enjoyment of a fighter based on where they were on the ranked ladder, and based on the matchup. Speaking of, I also asked players what made the fighters that they didn't enjoy so unenjoyable. The common response here was players saying unfun fighters were uninteractive, or, as I mentioned, the matchup was pretty rough. Some players also noted that repetitive gameplay was a turnoff, or that they viewed the fighter as being too strong overall. On the flip side, when I asked players what made them think that characters were fun and what made them rank them highly, over 75% of players rated characters being engaging or having interactive mechanics as positive factors, with about 50% of players also noting that well-balanced fighters and fighters with diverse game plans are much more fun to fight than fighters that don't have that. Ironically here, less than 40% of you guys admitted that a matchup is a positive factor when considering how fun a fighter is to play, which is much less than compared to when it's being scaled as a negative factor. I'm not really 100% sure why this is, but it might have something to do with feeling like you're being cheesed or you're hopeless in a bad matchup, but personally feeling like you earned the win in a good matchup. I know I feel this way whenever it comes to playing my little whale dog, so if this describes you too, let me know. Before we move on to the actual ranking of each fighter, I think it's important to share both the average fighters by ranking, by adding all the responses together, but also showing the graph results. I normally don't do this on my other community poll videos, but as you can see, some graphs follow a standard trend, and others have a pretty crazy data spread that I'll explain on a case-to-case basis later on. I also want to note that this video's goal is not to make anyone feel bad about who they main, and it shouldn't be used to tell a friend or other competitor how annoying they are for their character. I was genuinely curious what the community thought about the characters, since I personally enjoy fighting most of, if not all of the cast, especially when I compare them to the cast of some other platform fighters. To kick off our list though, let's start with the least popular characters and work our way to the most popular. Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately if you hate fighting her, Clairen is down here at the bottom of our list. In an open response section, players noted that Clairen felt easy to pilot with little risk and high reward for landing non-committal tippers, and that working around a sword or destroying a neutral could lead to some unengaging gameplay, since normally Clairen is playing from that safe, poke distance instead of being up in your face and scrapping the same way that other characters higher up on the list might. On the flip side, I did notice a trend with higher ranked players rating Clairen higher and more fun to fight. It wasn't 100% consistent, but it's clear that as counterplay develops at the upper level, Clairen has become more and more bearable to fight. Another common trend throughout Clairen's data is that stubby characters, or characters that rely on projectiles like Orcane, Absa, and Etalus, all rated this matchup pretty poorly, with a handful of them noting specifically how hard it can be to commit to closing gaps due to the stubbiness and how unrewarding using their set play tools are due to the no fun zone. This no fun zone has led to Clairen receiving a no fun score of 3.9 out of 10. Our next fighter sees a considerable jump in points, with Maypul planting herself down here on the list. Players that did leave notes on Maypul commonly mentioned that her size and speed made her really hard to combat in neutral, but when you did get that neutral win, it was super rewarding due to how interactive her recovery was based on what you're doing to ledge guard her. Some players, especially on the lower end of the ranked ladder, noted that tools like dash attack and tether felt way too centralizing or much too strong in some scenarios. It didn't feel engaging. So if you do find yourself in that group, I suggest using both sticks to DI Maypul's tether, since using SDI with your C stick helps out just a hair when it comes to falling out of her combos. For her dash attack, I recommend floor hugging the first hit and then shielding the second if you can. The second hit is pretty laggy on shield, and I know this doesn't fix her being fast or short or hard to hit, but it might make the matchup a touch more bearable for you guys. Players that played heavies or slower fighters tended to rate Maypul a little lower than the average, which is probably an extension of her kit having so much power within her movement and speed. This skewed our final graph just a hair, with very few players rating her in the middle and most players having a lot of fun or not a lot of fun against her. leading to her ranking at an average of 4.6, a whole 0.7 point jump over Clairen, and one of the biggest jumps on this list. Before we hop over to our next fighter, I really quickly want to ask you to leave a like on the video. Recently, YouTube stopped counting views that are done with an ad block, and while I think using ad block is so awesome, it's de-promoting my videos in the algo. But a like can fix that. All the revenue I make from these videos goes back to my local scene and free online weeklies, so any support means the world. Keep using that ad block, and thanks for watching the video. Ranno hops into our list here at fighter number 3. Players noted that Ranno was actually really fun to fight and engaging when the Ranno player chooses to be engaging. However, bad memories of a Ranno needle camping was a common sentiment throughout the player's responses. Most notably, he gets a tool that punishes you over time, allows him to camp, and allows him to make his approaches notably safer. I personally don't mind this aspect of Ranno in most matches, but I'm sure a lot of y'all like me have a memory or two of a really campy Ranno on ranked, ruining the fun for everyone. Overall, there was actually more positives about Ranno than not, especially noting how fun it was to scrap with him in neutral when he's obviously not camping as I mentioned earlier. One player also noted that his recovery is a lot more fun to engage with ever since the 1 bubble per airtime rule was enforced, and bubble got nerfed as a defensive tool, which I really agree with. All in all, Ranno has ended up with a nice score of 5.4, making him our first positively rated fighter. Olympia is up next. Her aggressive kit, fast moves, and huge combos make her a struggle to fight against, as noted by players, since she's always breathing down your neck. However, she's a lot of fun to engage with for the same reason. Her variety of kill options make fighting her a struggle, especially for fighters with few disadvantage options, or a lack of great frame data for scrapping, like Etalus, Loxodont, or even Absa. However, Olympia also has a big weakness of a low base speed, a vulnerable recovery, and a very fast fall speed, allowing her to be comboed more effectively. This means that even in her best matchups, players are able to navigate a set without feeling helpless, or like that they have no choice throughout the match. Her stubbiness also leaves her vulnerable to characters with big disjoints, but you can never feel too safe against her due to her great burst movement, so there's definitely a form of give and take here. A trend I thought was really interesting with Ollie is that a lot of the lower level players ranked her to be frustrating, and a handful of the top players did as well. But towards the middling elos like Gold and Platinum, and some Diamond, Olympia was rated a hair higher. I wonder if this is due to players not knowing counterplay at the low levels, and players seeing the full potential of Olympia's kit in the Masters and above levels. It's something interesting to theorize about. Overall, Olympia is only a few points above Ranno, clocking in at a 5.49. Following up Olympia, we have Fleet. I was kinda surprised to see her up this high since she has a zoner-esque kit, and those are normally not too popular to fight against. But tons of responders noted that she actually has really varied and deep gameplay, and has clear, concise, and easy counterplay. I had a few comments, however, noting that it was really boring to fight a cycle of Tornado, F-strong tech chases, and then down airs off stage, but a lot of these responses were from players at lower ranks, no shade. Which is where I'd imagine Fleet struggled to do a lot more. Overall, Fleet's kit was noted to be engaging, but not to the same degree as a rushdown fighter, just in a different way. Since you don't necessarily scrap with Fleet in every interaction, but you might be scrapping and interacting with her projectiles, big hitboxes, or offstage presence. One note that I'd like to add here that I think is more relevant, especially as we move up, is that it's interesting to think about how popular characters are, both in online brackets, offline super majors, and ranked play. I know Fleet used to be really strong in the initial launch patch for this game, and ever since then she's been tuned down and more zoner tools have been added to the game, so she's lost a bit of her popularity. I don't think this is the sole reason why she's ranked this high, but I imagine if a character like Fleet, or really any of the other characters going forwards, were perceived to be overtuned, they might be ranked closer to Maypul or Clairen. Thankfully, Fleet's not perceived this way, and is making a mark on our list here at a nice 5.6. Her chart did have some irregularities, with a handful of players voting her pretty low, and some voting her pretty high. When checking who ranked her low, it's commonly Loxodont and Kragg players, and the high rankings are commonly from characters like Clairen and Orcane. Soaring into our list up next, we have Wrastor. Wrastor and the next three fighters were all scored the exact same and came down to a fraction of a decimal when averaging them. So even though he's this low, maybe one or two responses could have bumped him up a bit. Comments on Wrastor were a bit rare since I don't think a ton of people actually play him outside of the top ranks. But players that did choose to share their thoughts on Wrastor noted that his deep gameplay showed a lot of skill expression, both coming from the Wrastor player and from his opponents. Since there is obviously counterplay to his options, it just comes down to executing and timing it correctly to mix up an opposing player. Players who didn't rock with Wrastor noted that his kill confirms felt like they could cheese you a hair too early. But if I had to give my personal take on that, I kind of find myself cheesing Wrastor a lot more consistently than he cheeses me. But that just might be the skill level that I'm gaming at. All in all, Wrastor soars into our list with an average score of 5.7. It is one of the first charts that was pretty well agreed upon by the community, with players across most elos and mains voting pretty similarly to each other. Blazing his glory up next, Loxodont joins our list. As I mentioned when talking about Wrastor, Loxodont is part of the group ranked 5.7, with the fractions of points deciding the order. He is actually ranked 5.7254, and the next fighter is 5.7259, to give you an idea of how close they really are. Players noted that being zoned out by the big axe and Loxodont not being really incentivized to approach was a big reason why he's chilling down here on the list. His options aren't necessarily engaging, but they aren't completely unengaging or mashable to the same degree as a few other characters. Some players also noted that while he can be played in a super boring way like this, a lot of top Loxodonts like Kragg are actually playing in really interesting and flashy ways. I have some footage of Viviana, one of my favorite Loxodont players who competes in the last Talk Weeklies up right now, and she's always incredible to watch, since you can see that all of Loxodont's kit's being used, not just the passive tools as I mentioned. Loxodont received a score of 5.72, but his chart tells an interesting story, with some players ranking him as being very annoying to fight, and other players ranking him to be very enjoyable to fight. A common connotation I found here was that lower ranked players did tend to rank Loxodont as being really unfun to fight, but a few of them ranked him being really fun, so I'm not sure if that's the data being skewed by a low amount of responses, or a real trend truthfully. Up next, barely beating out Loxodont is Orcane. Orcane is one of the most divisive characters on the list, with 10 respondents marking him as a 4, and then 10 also marking him as an 8. Players who didn't rock with the whale noted that they find bubbles to be really annoying, which is pretty fair, especially with the most recent patch not allowing you to floor hug them on hit. However, players that did enjoy fighting Orcane noted that the most recent floor hugging changes made it a lot more clear when you could or couldn't floor hug some of his moves. If you're having trouble with this though, I suggest checking out the Dragdown Wiki. They have charts and sheets showing you how long you can floor hug certain options for, which is really helpful, especially in matchups like Orcane. Players also noted that the parry mechanic gave clear counterplay to Orcane's more annoying tools, which promotes him to play as a pseudo-rushdown, pseudo-zoning character, making a super interesting hybrid design that rewards skill in countering both gameplay forms. His recovery also being nerfed recently allows players to find more counterplay when the water puppy is recovering back to stage, leaving him in an overall rank of 7.2. For our last 5.7 scored fighter, we have Absa. Absa is our newest addition to the cast, and I'd argue she's probably the most well-received character so far, with Etalus being underpowered and Olympia being a little overtuned. Absa has, however, launched in a really nice spot, carving out a niche for herself in the metagame and within the current archetypes. She had similar notes to Orcane and Fleet, and the fact that her projectiles had clear counterplay, but players also noted that her skill ceiling being so high made them respect Absa players a lot more than someone who might play a character that they perceived as easy or free to win with. Players did note as well, however, that there were some spots in the match where Absa could be really frustrating, since she could choose to play non-interactively. But, on the other hand, I had a few responders put it really well, saying that even though players could choose to be unengaging, you could probably do that with any character, so that's not really a great reason to rank someone like Absa, Orcane, or Fleet abysmally low, when in reality most of their player bases are pretty engaging. As we see on Absa's chart, some players don't really love fighting her, with most of the player base finding her at a minimum fun and enjoyable to fight. The players that don't rock with her commonly mained characters that struggle to approach already, which is compounded by Absa's tools. Overall, she shocks our list with a final score of 5.74. Breaking away from the 5s, Forsburn is up next. Forsburn was noted by the community to have a really deep and interesting gameplay loop, since even though a lot of his gameplay is working around large disjoints similarly to Loxodont or Clairen, it has more clear and obvious counterplay with tools like Floor Hug being so strong into his options like Kate. Players also noted that Smoke was really fun to play around, and that ledge guarding him was so different and unique, since it's not impossible to keep him from making it back to the stage, but it takes extra steps and more mindful choices in that scenario, rather than just going for something like a spike against a Zetterburn or maybe a Ledgehog against a Loxodont. Some players who rated Forsburn low noted that his large hitboxes could make him a little hard to approach, but comments like this were a lot more rare when talking about Forsburn specifically when compared to the other swordy-esque fighters in the game. So I think this might be more of a matchup or a skill-dependent complaint, more than a consistent issue across the board. Speaking of consistent, however, Forsburn has had one of our most consistent votes with a pretty high rating of 6.3 out of 10. Forsburn's big brother, Zetterburn, is actually up next. Zetterburn was also noted as being one of the most versatile characters in the game, having tons of depth to his kit while keeping an overall simple game plan. His fast buttons, big combos, strong offstage presence and moves like down air and forward air, and early kill power make Zetterburn a consistent meta threat. But his vulnerable recovery, easy to combo weight, and intuitive buttons mean that scrapping with him is consistently fast paced, whether he's comboing you or you're comboing him. There's rarely a game where Zetterburn plays lame or slows down the pace of a match, culminating into fast, quick games against the Lion. Players who didn't really rock with Zetter told me that they felt like he was too fast or too strong, but I imagine that's more of a matchup thing, similar to Forsburn being too much of a sortie. Since most characters do have tools that can be used to beat Zetterburn, they just have to be a bit more patient and a hair more precise when using them. Truthfully, I'm a little surprised to see Zetterburn this high, since other brawlers like Olympia were all ranked a good bit lower on the list. But I personally love to fight Zetterburn, so you won't see me complain today. Overall, Zetterburn has a ranking of 6.4 out of 10. Sliding into our list like that penguin from Mario 64 that I definitely didn't crush out on over as a kid, we have Etalus. Etalus actually didn't get a lot of notes from you guys, but those that did chose to tell me about how they loved the interactivity of his icicles, since parrying them netted a lot of reward, but not parrying them let Etalus get a free approach or ice on the ground, which also made his approaches better, rewarding proper use of a projectile with an approach option, instead of rewarding proper use of a projectile with camping. His high skill ceiling and combo game also makes him pretty fun to fight, since, just like Zetterburn, the match is never slow. As we all know as well, Etalus gets comboed and bullied off stage super hard, which makes every match against him feel like you're kinda playing in the training room doing freaky custom combos. Players did note that Etalus' dash attack might have felt a little too good and could be annoying, but I think that's kind of his whole personality, so I personally don't mind too much. Overall, Etalus scored a flat 6.42, being just a few fractions of a percent over Zetterburn. An ironic trend I noticed with this chart was the higher ranked a player was, the less fun they tended to have against the bear. It wasn't an 100% correlation, but I think it's funny that as Etalus players get better and better, they might become less and less fun to fight. Finally, for our last fighter, we have a character I'm sure you're all not too surprised to see all the way up here, or maybe you are surprised because you didn't check the timeline at the bottom of the video, telling you the fighter order. But right now, we have Kragg at number 1. Kragg is a culmination of a lot of the positives that we've talked about throughout this list. He has clear counterplay due to him being heavy and not super fast, but he also has interactive projectiles, like his rock and down B, which are either easy to parry or hit back at him. His recovery has a lot of interactivity as well, with one commenter putting it better than I can say, saying, "Go bully Kragg on pillar. Win or lose, you'll have fun." That kind of feels like an old proverb or something to me. It really spoke to my soul. His advantage state is also fast and flashy, encouraging Kragg to scrap with you, while his frame data doesn't really allow him to be overly mashy, annoying, or too oppressive, making Kragg a clear fan favorite with a total score of 7.4 out of 10, a whole point above Etalus and Zetterburn. And if you've been paying attention to the charts so far, 10s were very rarely given out when ranking characters, but Kragg had 14 of them, which is almost 30% of our responders, ranking him as almost the perfect fighter to play against. To wrap up the video, I compiled all of our data into an easy-to-read tier list. I think it's really interesting to see the community reception to each fighter, and thinking about them in this way, since the ratings clearly don't necessarily align with a meta, or a specific matchup chart, or maybe even a character gimmick, since as we can see, sorties like Forsburn are rated really highly, while sorties like Clairen had been paid dust. As I mentioned at the start of the video, please don't use this list to be weird to a friend, or talk down to a player based on who they play. The Rivals community is small as is, and I wouldn't want a group of players to feel isolated or unwanted due to a silly little list like this. With that being said though, thanks tons for watching until the end. Galvin comes out in just a few weeks, and I cannot wait to check him out with the rest of you guys. Until then, bye for now.